Hello, my name is Kelly, and I'm so excited to be back with our AI today for another session. My session today will be on writing tips for students, specifically for academic papers. So again, my name is Kelly Wong, and I am a PhD student at Western University in Education Studies, which means I write a lot. I'm also a teaching assistant, and I've taught over 350 students in university. So I've read a lot of essays, I've graded a lot of essays, and I've given a lot of feedback to them. And I'm a former journalist of 5 years here in London. So I've written a lot of articles and edited a few articles too. And some of my written work includes over 1,300 online news articles during my 5 years of journalism, over 200 essays that I've written as a student. And then depending on whether it's a personal project or something for school, I've also written a lot of blogs, scripts, poems, and other types of creative writing. Writing is a big passion of mine, so I'm really excited to be doing the session today. So today we'll talk about the different types of academic papers that students may be asked to write, some tips for editing and proofreading, citations and references, and then some general writing tips. And we'll begin with the types of academic papers. Now, there are many different types of academic papers, starting with reflective. And this is where the writer or student will analyze an experience and say how it has impacted them and what they plan to do with their new knowledge through this personal experience. So for example, my sister-in-law is an early childhood educator, and she went to Fanshawe to get her degree. And during her time in the program, she had to do a lot of reflective writing. She got to reflect on her own childhood and some of her own experiences and talk about how that has inspired her to become an ECE and how that has helped her hone some of the skills that is needed. Next up is a literature review, and that is a comprehensive overview and analysis on existing research on a specific topic. So you'll often see literature reviews and thesis, for example, and that is really important because before you explore your own topic, a literature review makes you ensure that you're understanding the types of existing research that's out there and then combining them all together for a proper lit review. A book review is where you are going to be identifying the central ideas of a book. You're going to give the reader or your teacher some indication of the author's style and what they were trying to go for, and then offer an overall evaluation. So book reviews are very common in high school English class or university and college English classes. Next up is a thesis or a dissertation. These are very common in post-secondary education. So some undergraduate programs will require you to have an undergraduate thesis before you graduate. You'll notice it in a master's and PhD programs as well. They're a bit more common there. And it is a long-form essay that often involves original research and analysis. And a thesis can be anywhere from 100 to 400 pages long. So it's very long. It's pretty much like a book, and it can take years to write. Next up is a report, and reports are pretty common and they can be pretty general. There are a lot of different types, but a report summarizes or analyzes academic material. So it can be a book report or a book chapter report. It can be a lab report. If you're in school doing some sort of lab experiment, you'll be asked to write about it after in a report. And next up is an essay, which is arguably the most common type of academic paper out there for students. And that is a piece of writing on a particular subject. Now, there are plenty of types of essays out there, the four main ones being argumentative, expository, narrative, and descriptive. And let's go over all of them. So an argumentative essay is where you're going to be constructing logical arguments. And this is where you are going to be choosing a side. So argumentative essays are going to be biased. So for example, maybe you'll get a prompt like, has the implementation of mandatory voting positively or negatively affected democratic processes? And here you can choose either side and then argue. You can use research, you can use other resources, and then argue whether you think it has positively or negatively affected the topic. Next up is expository, and that is where you're going to be presenting factual information. So generally speaking, this is going to be unbiased. So for example, explain the impact of urbanization on wildlife habitats. You're not stating an opinion, you're just going to be explaining. So it's going to be unbiased generally. A narrative essay is going to be a bit personal. So for example, you can use creative language to really tell a story. An example of this is narrate a personal experience that has reshaped your perspective on success. And then descriptive can be a bit personal as well. So for example, using vivid language to really create imagery that's going to help you and your readers see what you mean. When it comes to writing an essay, we learned this in starting in high school English class, the 5-paragraph hamburger essay or the sandwich essay technique. The idea is that the top bun is your introduction, the bottom bun is your conclusion, and then all of your main points are in the center. So what that can look like is that you'll have an introduction where you are going to introduce the main topic. You're going to provide some basic context to help your readers understand what you're going to talk about, and then stating your argument and explaining that. The body of your essay is where you're going to dive deep, and you can have several points to really back up what you're trying to argue. And then your body is going to include evidence to really back up your argument. And that can be research, that can be data, that can be examples, and then also providing an analysis to really just put all of that together. And then for your conclusion, you're going to do a brief summary of your essay and what you talked about. You can restate your argument to wrap it up. And then you can also explain the significance of your essay and why it's important. In terms of the process of writing an essay, everybody is different, but generally, this is how it goes. First up, you're going to be reading your essay prompt thoroughly to make sure you understand what you're doing. Next up, you may choose a topic within your prompt unless your professor or teacher assigns you something very specific. And then next up, you're going to outline your essay. So really think about what you want to write about. You can do a mind map to help you see what topics you can choose from and how they can all intersect. And then for the structure of your essay, think about what you want to write and where you want to put it. So what's your point one? What are you going to cite for point one? What are you going to include for point two, etc. For the actual writing process, you can start with the introduction and then the body and then the conclusion. And then when you're all done, you can edit your essay, which is what we'll talk about next. So for editing and proofreading, this is a general editing checklist I found online, and I think it's pretty helpful for students. So when you finish your essay, you want to check for grammar, capitalization, punctuation, spelling, and these things, if you're using a program like Microsoft Word or Google Doc, they can often catch these mistakes for you, but it's always a good idea to go back and just really read and see where else you can improve and catch some errors that the system hasn't caught. When it comes to formatting, every essay is going to look different because depending on what citation style your teacher may want you to do, you're going to be formatting that differently. So we'll talk about that in just a bit. Now, my typical editing routine after I finish writing an essay is read it over, make edits, and then take a break. And that break is anywhere from 20 minutes to a couple of hours, maybe even overnight. And then read it over and make more edits, take a break, and then read it over and make more edits if needed this time, and then submit. I do like reading it over 3 times just to make sure I'm catching as many errors as I can and finding some ways to improve. In terms of some recommendations I have for editing, the first one is really important, and that's to read aloud. I cannot tell you how helpful this trick is because you can really tell how smooth your essay is when you read it aloud. When we write an essay, we're so familiar with the essay that reading it in our heads can oftentimes mean skipping over errors that we didn't even notice. So it's a great idea to read aloud to really make sure that you're not skipping over any errors and making sure it's smooth when you read it out loud. Bonus points if you can ask someone else to read it over for you, especially if they can read it out loud, because another set of eyes on your paper can help you catch some errors that you may have missed. Also, don't be afraid to take a long or even an overnight break. That's just going to give your brain a break and a fresh start the next morning. If you spend all day writing an essay and it's 9:30, you're so drowsy, you're so tired, you're bound to skip over some errors. You're not going to catch all of them. So go to bed, get a good night's sleep, and then check it over the next day. If you want to use some online editing tools like Grammarly, absolutely go for it. They can be very helpful, but just know that they're not perfect and they're not going to catch everything. So trust your gut. I do not use Grammarly. Some of my students do, but I always tell them that they're not perfect. And if Grammarly is saying, you can improve this sentence this way or change this word for that, but you don't really agree with it, don't go with it. Go with your gut. Also remove unnecessary words. If you have the sentence, for many students in the province of Ontario, school begins in the month of September, you can remove the province of, the month of, because those are unnecessary and they just add clutter into your sentence. I often find students, when they see a big word count for an essay, they kind of freak out and then they start writing, very passively rather than actively. And they include a lot of unnecessary words. But the recommendation I have for that is to don't worry about the word count too much. Just go ahead and write as needed. And then at the end, if you find that your word count for your essay is significantly lower than what your teacher wants, you can just add another point. If you wrote a 3-point essay, add a 4th point if you have enough room, because adding a 4th point is going to be so much more beneficial to your essay than having a bunch of unnecessary words. And finally, follow formatting requirements, because you may lose marks if you don't. So let's go over that. So citations and references. There are a lot of different citation guides out there. And what that is that it's a set of rules on how to document sources in academic writing. And these styles ensure consistency and provide proper credit to the original authors. There are a lot of different types of citation styles. However, APA, MLA, and Chicago are the most common. APA stands for American Psychological Association, and it's often used in education, psychology, and sciences. I'm in education, so I use APA. MLA stands for Modern Language Association, and it's often used in the humanities. So for example, literature, philosophy, languages. And then Chicago is often used in business, history, and the fine arts. Again, this is just general. Your teacher may ask you to do APA even though you're in a business class. So always make sure you're doing what your teacher is asking of you. Sometimes the teachers and professors will say, I don't care what style, in which case you can choose one or you can do freestyle. But if you do choose to follow one of these, just make sure you're following it very, very carefully, because they do have very different formatting criteria. For example, their title pages. So you'll see here that every title page looks different. If you're doing an APA or a Chicago paper, your title page is going to have its own page. But if you're doing MLA, your title page can be on the same page as your introduction paragraph. You'll notice the difference too, APA and then Chicago, there's a big space. In Chicago. In APA, there isn't a whole lot of space between the title and the rest of the information. So just make sure you know exactly how you're going to format. Another example is the citations pages and how different they can look. They don't even call it the citations page. They all have a different name for it. APA, we call it references. MLA, we call it works cited. And then Chicago, we call it a bibliography. We can lose marks if we are doing an APA paper and call our references list, works cited or bibliography. So just be really, really careful about exactly which type of citation style you're doing and then following that. If it feels like a lot of information, it is, but don't worry, there are resources online for you. Purdue OWL is the one I really, really recommend. Their website is owl.purdue.edu, and it is a free website for students. I've been using it since high school, and they have citation guides on Chicago, MLA, APA, and a bunch of others, and they do update it regularly as well, so that if there is a new, format for those, they have it updated as well. On Purdue OWL, you'll find sample papers from students, so you can go over theirs as well and see how they cite it. And then they teach you how to cite everything from online news articles, articles without an author, articles without a date, books, podcasts, all sorts of different things. So it's a really, really useful website that I cannot recommend more highly for students. And finally, I'll just wrap it up with some general writing tips. First up is to read more. If you want to write better, you got to read more. And you can really read anything. You can read nonfiction, fiction, scientific papers, magazines, newspapers. Reading more will help you understand other writers' style more, and that can really help you improve yours or find yours. So I always recommend reading more whenever you can. Next up, brainstorms should be messy. If you have the opportunity to pick your own topic for your essay, definitely go all out with the brainstorm. Do a crazy mind map and just put every single idea out there. That's going to give you so many options and help you choose what you want to write about. And it's also going to help you connect topic to topic to make your essay more smooth. Next up is to practice writing regularly and really get creative with it. This session was on academic writing, but I think it's important for everyone to be more in love with creative writing as well. It can be keeping a daily diary, it can be bullet journaling, it can be writing poems, because practicing writing regularly can improve your skills through all sorts of writing, including academic papers. Number 4 is to know when to stop. It is so common when you are researching for a paper to go down rabbit holes when you find something interesting, but just stay focused on what your essay topic is and know when to stop and say, you know what, I found enough information. We're just going to stick with what I found. And finally, to embrace feedback. Writing is so subjective, which makes it beautiful, but definitely difficult. So when you receive feedback from your teacher, don't just look at your grade and toss your paper in your backpack. Really read it over and see how you can improve, because that's going to help you in your future when you're still a student and after you graduate. So if your teacher says this part wasn't clear, you can ask them about that. You could have elaborated more. You can ask them about that to become a better writer. And that wraps it up. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I hope you found this helpful and have a great day.